to LOA Today. I'm Walt Thiessen. With me today is longtime listener, poet laureate, and Taya Master, Anne-Marie Young. This is your Daily Dose of Happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today. It actually helps if I put us on screen so we can hear each other. It's a good thing to do.
So Anne-Marie,
it does. It's just one of those amazing things. You turn the mics on and all of a sudden everything works and it's a good thing.
Who knew?
Who knew? But Anne-Marie, we actually, before we got started here, you got another taste of something that I know you got quite a bit of while you were visiting the U.S., and that is appreciation for the mid-British accent, which, I mean, you've mentioned it before. I mean, you could probably work at Buckingham Palace. I mean, you just have exactly the right accent for that. So I'm going to just start with that as kind of our light note to get started here, and just to ask you one very simple question.
What's that?
I, as a very tall man, I get asked all the time about my height. Do you get asked all the time outside of the country about your accent?
Yeah, I mean, when we went to the States earlier this year, well, last month actually, you know, wherever I was choosing sunglasses with my daughter. Somebody's like, oh, "I love your accent." Go and order something. I love your accent, and it's not boring because it is a nice accent, our British accent, and we've got so many regions. And to the people in Britain, I do not belong in Buckingham Palace. I do not have a posh accent.
Not us fooled. It's the first thing I said when I spoke with you. The accent's lovely.
Thank you. Yeah, it's not a posh one, but I'll take the compliments.
You could have fooled us. Let's put it that way.
Okay. Well, I will just with my grace and my royalty.
Right. Yeah. Just wave with the magic wave. The turning hand. There you go. See, you've got it. You got it down. You're good.
I can do royalty. Here I am in my tracksuit, but hey ho.
So we're joined today by Bev Mitelman, excuse me, who, as she was pointing out to us at the beginning, before we got started, her topic is one that is full of trauma. And I just want to reassure you, Bev, trauma is something we deal with a lot here on the show. And it's a part of life. It's a part of getting stronger. It's a part of growing. So it's not something that we shy away from. We just refuse to take it deadly seriously. We try to find a way to find the humor in it. Because there's always a positive side to stuff, and so we just try to find the positive side of that. So you're basically, that's just my long-winded way of saying you're in good company. It's going to work out great. Don't worry about it.
Thank you.
So welcome to the program. How you doing today, first of all?
I'm doing great. Thank you. I'm happy to be here with you and your audience. So thank you for having me on.
Glad to have you. And one of the first things we always like to do when we have a guest on the program is to get the backstory, because the backstory kind of frames the whole conversation. It usually is the driving force behind how the person ended up doing whatever it is that they're doing. I'm certain it's true in your case as well. So give us a little backstory so we know what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I'm almost 50 years old. So when someone says to me, give me a short backstory, it's like, how do you condense, right? It'd be easier if I was 22. So, but I'll do my best.
Well, you just do the last 22 years if that helps. I mean, that's okay.
I don't really remember the first 22, to be honest. But yeah, so I grew up in a fairly chaotic home environment. I think that, in today's day and age, we're becoming so much better at talking about our realities of what happened in our childhood. But going back to my childhood, we didn't discuss these things, right? What happened within the home was considered almost dirty laundry. Mm-hmm. That was actually an expression that my parents used. Mm-hmm. And there were some really difficult things happening within the home that upset the family dynamic, right? And so, I went through life, I would say, with a father who was really, really stressed. I think he took his role as a provider to be really, really important, mm-hmm. but his role as a protector, I'm not sure he ever got fully on board with that.
Oh, okay.
So his focus was on making sure that we had, enough resources for the family. And I recognized that, and he did a beautiful job. My mother was mentally ill, and we had a lot of chaos in the house because of this. So what does this all mean? I grew up not necessarily feeling that I had an emotional attunement to my parents. There was definitely abuse in my home, physical abuse, mental abuse, and emotional abuse, all types of abuse except sexual abuse. I want to be clear about that. And what that, I guess, led me to was to develop a certain a personality and set of traits that in one regard served me really well in this life, and in another regard didn't. So I became the type A student, perfectionist. I got, to the nth degrees my education, and I started my corporate jobs, but I had all of this confusion lingering in terms of not understanding my own mind. And so I bring this into conversation to say that for those years, while I was soaring in my career and I got married and I had children and everything looked perfect, but my mind was so unsettled and I was so emotionally dysregulated because I had never learned how to emotionally regulate. And so I sought help from lots of different people, and I tried lots of different modalities of therapies. And I was grateful to find many years ago this work on attachment theory. And when I found attachment theory, for me, it helped me really understand what I was dealing with, what my challenges were, and how I could use this knowledge to repair my mind. Right. And I say repair my mind because when we talk about attachment styles, it's really a set of learned behaviors. We learn these really young. It's like a set of rules for how we give and receive love, how we emotionally bond with someone else. So important in this world. And if we come to the realization that we need to do some work on ourselves and we're having trouble in our relationships and we're not feeling like we're equilibrated, like we're off balance, we can unlearn a lot of these patterns. And so, long story short, I took you through the 50 years.
Well done.
Yeah, long story short, what was such a difficult childhood brought me into a direction of healing myself. I say healing's a journey, it's not a destination, but healing myself. And now I spend my time working with others so that they can understand their mind and they can also move towards a much more peaceful, harmonious sense of self, to understand their mind and to build much better relationships with those around them.
Fantastic. By the way, you did that very, very well. I mean, you said that was 50 years, and you condensed that beautifully. So well done.
Thank you, Wallace. Thank you. That's tricky, right? I mean, where do you start? Yeah.
Well, I think you did it very nicely. And there's one point that I want to zero in on because the phrase you used, attachment theory, has some very specific meanings to it. I want to make sure we bring those meanings out. Let's start by differentiating between attachment and connection.
Okay. So, such a great question. So connection, we can have connection with almost anyone, right? So you can walk into Starbucks in the morning and you can have a nice little point of connection with your barista and you can exchange a smile and you can have connections with lots of different people, right? We connect on so many different levels, right? So sometimes we really connect with a particular friend on, intellectually, and we have great conversations, or we have another girlfriend of ours, who we really connect to emotionally. Of course, we can connect physically, we can connect sexually, spiritually. So the term connection references something just a little bit more in the moment, short term, right? It can be much longer, but if I use the example of the barista, you see them in the morning, it's a 3-minute connection, you're on with your day.
Right.
So attachment is very different. Attachment is an emotional bond with someone. So that takes time to develop, right? And as we come into this world as little babies, the first attachment that we have is to
Mom.
to mom. It could be a dad, it could be a grandmother, but our caregiver, right? So whoever's playing that primary caregiver role, that's our initial attachment, is to that person. And it's so critically important because as little babies, we are 100% dependent. If a child is not nurtured and cared for, they will die.
Yeah.
Right?
So true.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. And so that bond is critically important. Now, of course, when we talk about care of a child, are you feeding them? Are you changing their diapers? Are you bringing them to the doctor if they're not feeling well? That's one set of care. There's also emotional attunement, right? So when a baby comes into this world, it's like their mind is blank. And we, as the people who are caring for these little babies, we teach them, this is how you interrelate with someone else. So when a baby cries and we come over and we try to cheer it up, the baby learns expressions on our face. They learn from the tonality of our voice. They learn, if we're playful with them. And so that's a level of attunement that would develop into a child who feels very comfortable in themselves. They learn super young that if I cry, my mommy, my daddy, my aunt, my caregiver is going to come and take care of my needs. Beautiful, right?
Yeah.
So we say that person then develops a secure attachment, emotional bond. They've learned the set of rules for giving and receiving love, and they see it as forms of connection. So they trust in themselves to identify that, okay, I have this need and I can communicate it, and trust in the other people around that they will respond to help me. So that's the utopia. That's the most beautiful scenario. But not everyone grows up in a home like that. Okay.
And sorry, I was going to say, you can actually see the difference in the brains of these children, can't you? I mean, it actually affects the brain's development and you can see in x-rays or CT scans that there's a difference of the kids that's been nurtured and the children that haven't, and how it hasn't fully developed.
So they've done,
fascinating.
It is fascinating. And they've also done imaging of, adults around trauma responses and what that looks like in the brain. So these are, I don't want to wrap everything into the word trauma, and we can unpack the word trauma, but this is impactful. And it's impactful, especially for a young child, because a young child is so suggestible at that age. So that's why we get patterned really early on. And then we go through life and we experience things, and our attachment can change depending on what we experience.
Sure.
But the initial pattern starts at that point. And yes, Anne-Marie, you're absolutely correct. Like you can see that some parts of the brain are more active than other parts, right? Which is interpreted as, more developed or underdeveloped. So then we go to the other, I would say part of our population. It's generally split in half, and people like to, question how valid the statistic is. This is all self-reported, so it's difficult to say, 18% of the population. So we're not like very strict on the statistics. So we tend to go like half the population is secure and the other half has a more insecure attachment style. And an insecure attachment style can fall along a continuum, right? Where there's different sub-styles within that. So we have an anxious, preoccupied person, and I'll talk about all of this in a moment. We have a dismissive, avoidant person who's on like the other side of things. And then somewhere in the middle, we also have what we call the fearful avoidant. And that person exhibits traits of both the dismissive avoidant and the anxious preoccupied. This person is usually the one that people will call the hot and cold partner, right? One day they're into you, one day they don't want to hear from you.
Right.
So, right. And so now we're starting to see, okay, there's a distinct set of behaviors. So behaviors, emotional patterns, thought patterns, communication style, boundaries, coping mechanisms that very prescriptively can follow each one of these individuals into their adult years, depending on the level of attunement and what they received as a child. So let's juxtapose, the first baby who, for the most part, the parent was consistently attuned to them. Let's juxtapose that with other scenarios. So
And before you even go there, I just want to clarify one point.
Sure.
Because I'm pretty sure that, we always have to lay things out like this so that we understand what different categories we're talking about. But when you look at the actual real picture, there's no such thing as somebody who was purely secure, another person who was purely traumatized. It's a gray scale, right? Different people falling on different places on that scale on a wide variety of different things. So it's not like it's black and white kind of a thing. It's got gray.
Yeah, excellent points. And with, a lot of things in regards to psychology, sociology, there's gray zones, right? And so it absolutely is a continuum. So what we normally say is that this person is mostly secure, but even at that, they may have some tendencies in another direction, right? If you go on my website at securelyloved.com, there's an attachment quiz. It's free. I tell everyone it's a great place to start just for an awareness. Take the quiz and it's going to spit out a series of numbers, percentages of where you fit in each one of these categories, which beautifully speaks to your point, Walt. As humans, we don't fit into little boxes.
Not really, no.
No, we don't. But
it makes it easier to talk about it, but that's why we do it that way. Yeah,
but you're absolutely it's a really good point that you made, right? So someone, for example, might be 70% secure and 30% dismissive avoidant. And we can predict with some good accuracy how this person would respond in an argument. There's some very specific things that people do. So thank you for clarifying that. I'll continue to talk about the different categories, but
In fact, you mentioned one that kind of caught my attention. I don't remember what the label was that you gave to it, but you described the person who's kind of hot and cold. One time they're interested, they're engaged, and so forth. The next moment, they're turned off, they're distant, and so forth. And on the face of that, we would consider that to be a fairly negative kind of trait. But it also occurred to me there's a positive side to it, and there's probably a positive side to all of these things too, and there are negative sides to even the more stable ones. In this case, the one that I was thinking of is that person is probably going to do very well in the romance field, because the development of a romantic relationship is get a little bit warmer, get a little bit cooler, a little bit warmer, a little bit cooler until it finally starts to come together. That's just the way so that's actually going to feed in well to that.
So fearful avoidants typically do really well in the early stage of dating.
Yeah, I would think.
And because they have certain traits that are very that lend very well to dating. So for example, they're very present. They really enjoy conversations that have depth to them. What they're actually doing, which might not be obvious to them or the person they're speaking to, is they're trying to discern. They want to learn about you. Their interest is genuine, and they want to learn, can I trust you? So, right. So, but it can feel really, really beautiful when someone is so interested in you and wants to know everything about you and enjoys spending time with you. But, I'll go over the core wounds. The core wound of the fearful avoidant that they took out of childhood is, I will be betrayed. So you know, there's good, there's positives, there's negatives. And again, this stuff is not set in stone, but the patterns are pretty prescriptive.
Mhm.
So just so everyone knows what we're talking about, I'll do my best to do a real sort of quick review of what these insecure attachment styles are.
Okay.
So on the one end of the spectrum, we have the anxious preoccupied. This individual is generally the one who we see on the internet, and I hate this, but they generally get displayed as the needy one, the clingy one, the one who needs all sorts of validation and reassurance. If you're in a relationship with this person, they're likely to call you every 2 hours. Are we okay? Where are you? Are you with someone else? So where this stems from is a child who experienced either abandonment in childhood or perceived abandonment, right? Children perceive things sometimes, and it's not necessarily accurate. But we do see, you know, often enough, for example, where a child came out of divorce and they were abandoned, or they were sent to live somewhere else with a relative, or the parents were never home because they were working so much. And so there's lots of scenarios there where a child could say, you know what? Because children do this, they blame themselves. You know, if my parents really loved me, they would spend time with me.
Mhm.
They don't have the ability to apply critical thought and go, my parents are doing everything they need to provide for me. The child looks at it differently, right?
Mhm.
And so because they have this fear of don't leave me, that's in fact how they show up in romantic relationships. They're very anxious. And these people tend to, when you meet them, they're fun, they're funny, they're really engaging. They oftentimes talk a mile a minute and over explain. So tell me about your childhood, and it's like 3 hours later, you know everything about this person. Like they have very little boundaries, and they can move the relationship, any relationship, a friendship, a colleague at work, especially a romantic relationship, they will move that at lightning speed.
It kind of reminds me of there was an episode of a cable television program here in the U.S. called Inside the Actors Studio.
Yes.
You know the program?
Yeah.
And James Lipton, who's the host,
He's
had all
great.
these very famous people on there. This particular show, they had Robin Williams on. And you can
Yeah.
imagine what it was like. The first 7 or 8 minutes was Robin just being Robin. And the thing that was really noteworthy in particular in relation to what you were just talking about is after Robin was Robin for like the first 7 or 8 minutes and everybody's sides are splitting because of all the laughing, James Lipton very drolly says, "For my first question," which kind of illustrates what you're talking about there. Somebody who just, I mean, not that Robin Williams was that particular personality necessarily, but that was his comedic style. But that kind of person literally just can go on and on, so that it becomes a funny line to say, "Well, here's my next question," because that's the last thing you're going to say for the next 10 minutes.
Yeah, and I was a big fan of Robin Williams. I'm glad that
there aren't too many of us who aren't.
Right. I mean, iconic. But if you dive into Robin Williams' life, you will undoubtedly see that he was very emotionally dysregulated.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And he used comedy as his outlet. His coping mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
But so that again, I want to introduce the concept of emotional regulation. Emotional regulation is yet another skill. So if you come out of a home where your parents themselves have the skill to emotionally regulate, and there's conflict or something that comes up, and you're able to learn how to communicate, and there's space given for your emotions. And, I raised 2 boys. They're 18 and 20. They're both off at university now. But when my boys would get angry, like, what they would want to do is sit there and like slam the door and yell. And I remember sitting them down and go, you can be angry, that I'm okay with that. You can't slam the door.
Yeah.
Because I own that door that you're slamming, right? So you can't do that. You can't punch a wall, but you can tell me, I want you to take a little bit of space. I'm going to take a little bit of space, calm down. And then when you're ready to talk, I want to hear what you're angry about.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I did something or I said something, tell me because I won't do it again.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's the type of emotional regulation that generally happens when a child is in a secure home. The parents are emotionally mature. They have the skills. They pass the skills down to the parents, to the kids.
Yeah.
Now, in the other set of homes, oftentimes when we're talking about children who come out of homes where there's a great deal of chaos, neglect, abuse, abandonment, oftentimes the caregivers themselves are not emotionally regulated.
Right.
And so they're unable to pass this along as a skill. So we come into adulthood and there's a whole group of, adults who, when they're upset, lose it. They don't know how to say, you know what, I'm going to go for a walk and let my nervous system calm down. They never learned how to self-soothe.
Mm-hmm.
They only learned how to do it, that they're heavily reliant on an external source, or the way that they self-soothe, for example, they become overly self-reliant. They shut out the world and they just spend 3 days by themselves. So, they really take themselves out of the situation. They've never learned co-regulation with a partner. So they're at a great disadvantage because they come into the world and they don't have the same set of skills. Right.
And the skills that they do develop are actually counterproductive, but they seem productive at the time. I mean, I'm literally thinking of a neighbor right now.
Yeah.
This is a neighbor who the two parents have never learned that their own escalation teaches the child to escalate.
Right.
And so every time that they get frustrated with the child, they escalate, then the child escalates, and then they get mad at the child for escalating. And you can hear them repeat the behavior over and over and over and over again. And there's a part of you in your own mind that says, are they ever going to learn what they're doing? They probably won't necessarily unless somebody points it out to them.
Well, that's it. And then if you try to point it out to them, ego gets in the way, right? Because it feels like a criticism. But right. I have a friend like that too. She's constantly yelling at her two daughters.
Mm-hmm.
And I've tried to say, you know what, there's better ways to deal with it. But she calls me and she's like, I'm done. The kids are yelling at me and this. And I'm like, of course they're yelling at you. You taught them that's how you communicate. They don't know any other way.
That's exactly the strategy you gave them. I mean, why are you surprised?
I'm like, they learned exactly what they needed to learn from you, except you taught them the wrong thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. So there's that point of reflection too. But so anyways, I'm going to circle back. We have the anxious, preoccupied person. And, when they get into a romantic relationship, they often will move very, very quickly. And because they are so dependent on an external source for validation, reassurance, for soothing, they need to sort of lock down a partner really quickly, right? Love and connection for them is the most important thing.
Because what it really is a way to cover up for the lack of security, the lack of safety.
That's right. That's right. Such a good connection you just made. Yeah. So now on the other side of the spectrum, the dismissive avoidant person, they also didn't learn how to self-regulate in their childhood. They most often would have been neglected. Right. And there's lots of ways to neglect a child. Right. So if a child comes to you and they're crying and a mother says something like, stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about.
Mm-hmm.
You heard that? Or right. Or, Mama, I had an issue today. So-and-so told me that they didn't like my hair. This is like kid stuff. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And it's invalidated, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe your mother turns around and says, well, that's not a big deal. What are you worried about that?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I am worried about it. It upset me, so I'm trying to talk to you about it. So there's a lot of ways to neglect. When parents also give you the silent treatment or, when they are specifically giving attention to another sibling and not you.
Mm-hmm.
Emotional attention, praise, approval. There's all these things that we need as humans, right? So if you deny your child that, it is emotional neglect. And so what happens is that the child learns, this child develops into a person who has a dismissive avoidant attachment style. They learn that I can't rely on others. I've asked and they didn't help. So my strategy is I'm going to become incredibly self-reliant, hyper independent, right? And I'm going to value my freedom, my independence, my choice. And these folks, also have a hard time in relationship. You could imagine, right? Because
Sure.
every time they're feeling dysregulated, they need to step out of the world and regulate. And the anxious preoccupied, when they're feeling dysregulated, they need to call 10 girlfriends and tell the story 6 times over and over and over, right? They need to talk it out. Anne Marie, have you had a friend like this before that has called you and like for 3 months is talking about the same thing?
Yeah, and she's like, please, what, when you go over the same things over and over again, it can be so draining and so exhausting. And they're not taking any advice. Not that they have to, but it's quite draining way to live, I think.
It is. It's because, and so, but if I tell you that what they're trying to do is emotionally regulate their body, they don't know how to do it themselves. And so they'll call anyone and everyone who will listen. And they'll repeat the story. For them, that's what is trying to balance out.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, so we have these 2 categories of people. And then we've got the fearful avoidance in the middle. We're going to talk about that person again. Now, the one core wound, limiting belief that is the same for all of the insecure attachments, whether it be dismissive avoidant, whether it be anxious preoccupied, or the fearful avoidant, all 3 of them have one shared core wound, which is I am unsafe. Right. And we talked about safety. The child who comes out of a secure home, they have a secure base. They feel safe in expressing themselves. They feel safe that others will respond to them in a healthy way. The other folks don't. The way they deal with feeling unsafe is where we see the distinguishers. So the fearful avoidance is the most complex of all the attachment styles. Another name for this would be disorganized attachment. And the reason is because generally a child who develops a fearful avoidant attachment style is coming out of a home where there was a lot of chaos, and oftentimes abuse.
Right.
So I want to imagine for a moment that a young child is, desperate for the love of their father. And you know what? I'll use myself as an example because this was my situation. I thought that my father, made the sun come out in the morning. To me, he was like, and the outward world also saw him as a very intelligent, powerful, kind person. But behind closed doors, he was mean. He was mean.
Right.
He was physical. He was frightening as hell. And I was just a little girl, and he's got this huge, presence, like he's 6 feet tall. And so I grew up feeling really, really confused.
Understandably.
Because all I wanted was the love of this man, Daddy, I did this at school today and see what I did. But it's from the same man who would, throw me across like against a wall. So you have to imagine a child doesn't understand any of this. The child is like, I so want the comfort and love from this person, but I know if I get too close, they can actually hurt me too. So I yearn for that love, but I keep my distance because I know that they can hurt me. And so that translates into romantic life in the sense of, Walt, let's say you and I are dating and we've started to have some sort of emotional connection. I would very much want to come towards you, right? Because I'm human. I need love and connection like everyone else. But the patterning in my mind would repeatedly tell me, don't get too close. He can hurt you.
Yeah.
Right.
So you get close, you push back. You get close, you push back. And so that's where you see this oscillation.
Right.
And when you understand the roots of where this stuff comes from, it's much easier to have some compassion.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right now I could see the two of you. You're like, oh, I know, I get it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I've experienced it. So I know, I mean, it's not like I have to reach very far. I'm sure other people have experienced it as well.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. And so, I want to just sort of, I guess, end this little section by saying that it's not a life sentence, right? Because these are learned patterns that got etched into our minds, and we can do work to unprogram that or reprogram new patterns. Right. So that is the work that I do at my organization. I have a group of practitioners that I work with, specifically in relationship and attachment trauma. And we work with folks internationally to identify where are those core wounds. And then we use very specific exercises to tap into the subconscious mind, not the conscious mind, the subconscious mind, to be able to reprogram. And there really is a big difference there, because the conscious mind, that is responsible for 3, 4, 5% of what it is that, our thoughts, our behaviors, our emotions. So not a whole lot, right? Like, that's our awareness. What people don't realize is that most of what we do, we feel, we say, and our actions and our behavior are on these like autopilot programs running in our subconscious mind.
And I think it's fair to say that thought, that fact is something that has gained a lot more awareness now than even 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
There's a tremendously high level of awareness. I mean, we've talked about it a lot here on the program in a variety of different contexts, and I'm sure we're not the only ones. I know. I mean, you mentioned social media. Just look at social media; you can find it out there too. It's the evidence is pretty much everywhere. So the awareness level is up tremendously. Not necessarily equated with the healing level, but the awareness level is really good.
So what's so interesting is that if we know that 97% roughly of all our emotions, thoughts, and behaviors are being driven by the patterns in our subconscious, anything that we're doing at the conscious level, we know will have a minimal impact. So like I believe in all sorts of modalities and try anything and everything, because usually it's a combination of things that make us feel better and achieve what we're looking for. But, I will mention, for example, something like a daily affirmation. If I sit there daily and I go, I will feel good today, I feel beautiful today, it's not impactful, because it's really just at the conscious mind. Well, you
Especially
really
if you don't believe it.
Yeah, you have to
If you
believe
don't believe
it.
it, it's going to actually have the opposite effect.
Right. But your belief patterns are not stored in your conscious mind. Right. And the subconscious mind doesn't speak the same language. Like, we speak language in a way that our conscious mind understands, but our subconscious mind actually speaks in imagery and emotion.
And emotion, yeah.
Yeah. Through repetition.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's how things got sort of, patterned in there to begin with.
Right.
So, yeah, that's why I think that this work, for me anyways, was really helpful. And that's the type of work that we do today.
That's very cool stuff.
Thanks.
Amory, if you have something, jump right in. You know me, I'm ready to just go right into the next.
I think that one of the questions I wanted to ask, and I know it's not under those 4 headings, but I think it's a word that gets bandied around a lot at the moment, which is narcissist. And is that something that's a learned thing, or is that something that's actually you're born with something in your brain?
So the internet is so good at taking buzzwords and like.
Yes, I agree.
So I want to be really clear. All of us, people get upset when I say this, all of us have narcissistic traits.
Oh my God.
I would
Right.
agree.
Like people think that like that's the most insulting thing I can say. Well, no, because to some degree we all need to be concerned about ourselves, right? And certain
Sure.
things. It doesn't mean that we experience grandiosity. It doesn't mean that we don't have empathy for others, but all of us have to various degrees narcissistic traits.
Yeah, if you can't take care of yourself, you're not going to stay alive. I mean, that's basic to human survival. You have to have concern for yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So when we're so quick, and I always hear it in the context of when someone's talking about their ex, oh, they were a narcissist. And the reason, a couple of things. If you take a random word and just label someone with it, I think that's just silliness. But it also removes all accountability that you would have to suggest that, hey, maybe your actions also had an impact on the outcome or demise of that relationship.
No. We're not allowed to have that.
Accountability.
Can't do that. And then I always, listen, I like to stir the pot. So when someone says to me, well, my ex was a narcissist, that's why I didn't work out. I always say, you don't seem like a person that would choose a narcissist.
Ooh, yeah. Yeah.
They chose their partner. These are not arranged marriages.
True.
These are not, you chose your partner. Oh, well, I didn't see it at first. Oh, okay. So was this, right? So it was like hidden and lurking in the background to come out and surprise you 10 years later.
Which just raised an interesting question. When did they see it? How long did it take before they noticed?
Right. In their response, it's usually like right around the time of a divorce.
Yeah, right.
Right. But so I do want to make a distinguisher again that attachment styles, everyone has an attachment style. It is not a mental illness. We do not diagnose people with attachment styles. We all have them. And narcissism, that's a whole other ball of wax. So we all have narcissistic traits, but narcissistic personality disorder is an actual diagnosable mental illness, right? It's in the DSM-5. So when people use the word narcissist, I'm not sure they're talking about traits or they're talking about mental illness. Either way, it's not our place to start diagnosing other people.
Yeah.
I think it's very dangerous to throw these labels onto people. So I'm not a fan of that.
Yeah. No, I was thinking about actual narcissists rather than, because I know the word is banded around way too much. But it was just because I know there is a condition and I didn't know if it was a learned behavior or not. So,
no, people who are narcissistic, studies will suggest that that it's a combination, right? They're born, but then they also learn some of these tactics. But what makes someone narcissistic is that at the center of their behavior is manipulation, right? So, oftentimes, I will see a comparative between someone who's narcissistic or has narcissistic traits and someone who's dismissive avoidant. Someone who's dismissive avoidant is running away because they're trying to regulate their nervous system. But to the other person, when they're stonewalling, they're not answering texts, they're not answering calls, it's very aggravating. Right. So I work with dismissive avoidance and I'm like, listen, you got to learn to communicate a little bit, right? Because your behavior is impacting the other person, but the motivation isn't the same. When a dismissive avoidant pulls away, they're not trying to cause physical harm or emotional harm. So it's not the same thing.
Yeah. No, I can see that.
Yeah, of course.
One other thought that comes to my mind too, and you were kind of alluding to it a moment ago, is that the labels necessarily involve experiences. They are reflective of experiences that were had in early childhood and that later develop into patterns. But there's also another piece to it that you kind of started touching on. I'd like to bring it out a little bit more, and that is there's a perception piece to it. Because whatever your perception is of your own experience is going to have almost a bigger role than what the experience is, don't you think? I mean, we're very creative beings. We can turn any scenario into anything. I continue to be amazed at just how powerful the human mind is at creating any scenario out of anything in any way that the person wants to do it.
I mean, you're so right on the money. As humans, we are great storytellers.
Oh yeah.
Right? And so part of attachment styles is almost like there's a lens that's created by which you end up seeing the world through. Right? And so, it colors our perception of things 100%. So you and I could, for example, attend the same dinner party and an hour later walk away and have completely different experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And this is common, right?
Yeah.
So,
well, we've all experienced that. Like, did you go to the same party I did? That we know that feeling. We all do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then there's these mechanisms in our mind that confirm certain biases. Like there's the reticular activating system, which is like, it confirms our bias. One of the most easiest examples to explain it is like, if you've decided that you're going to buy yourself a red car, the next time you go on the highway, you actually will start to notice how many cars are red.
There's thousands of them all of a sudden.
I knew it was the right choice. Look how everyone thinks red's the color. Look,
and they're all the model that I was looking at in the showroom too.
What we do is we filter out information that doesn't meet the narrative that we have, and we focus on the information that serves our narrative, right? So our mind does all these really interesting things. So yes, perception matters. The core wounds that you hold matter greatly. So, for example, the anxious preoccupied, their core wound would be something like, I will be abandoned. Mm-hmm. They also have the I am unsafe, because all the insecure people, insecure attached folks have that. But they might have a core wound like, I will be excluded. I am unlikable. I am unlovable. I am not good enough. So if, for example, you have particular core wound that I am not good enough, you can easily understand how that's going to color everything.
Yeah.
Right? Your romantic relationships, your friendships, getting that promotion at work. It may even prevent you from even trying, because you're like, I'm not good enough, so why would I bother, right? So it does very much act as a filter and a perception, right? So even the fearful avoidant, I will be betrayed, that creates really distinct patterns around hypervigilance and an inability to easily trust. Mm-hmm. Again, this is the child who is abused, right? So it could mean that, let's say you and I are having a conversation, and Marie, let's say we go for a walk in a park and we have a conversation, and you tell me that, I don't know, you tell me some sort of secret, let's just say. Okay. Now you're telling me the secret because you're trying to bond, and you want to maybe share it with a friend. I could potentially go home and go, why the hell did she tell me that? Mm-hmm. Like, obviously it's not true. She's lying to me. She knows I'm not going to believe her. What does she want me to do with that information? She's just not a safe person.
Yeah, you just lose that respect and you lose that trust, don't you?
Right.
Or you certainly adjust your relationship with that person. It's not so authentic, is it? Because you're just like, yeah, I can't talk to you. I don't want to tell you anything about me in case it goes X, Y, Z.
Yeah. So if you haven't done the work to understand why you have these patterns and how they're impacting your perception, you can be led astray your entire life. And also you could imagine, if I'm feeling like everyone's trying to betray me, and Anne-Marie is telling me things that aren't true, and she's lying and she's untrustworthy, and there's no point at which my body is going to feel calm and relaxed. I'm going to be in a state of fight or flight far, far more than I need to be. And that is the state where our body is pumping out cortisol. We're getting ready to fight. Our heart is beating, and not to go too much into other people's work, but like there's a whole there's a whole literature of work now, like Dr. Gabor Mate will talk about how, from these beliefs that we have, there's a strong link between the damage that it causes to our physical bodies,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
When we're under chronic stress. But chronic stress is a lot of times self-imposed, right?
That part gets tricky.
Yeah, it's tricky. And I wanted to talk just quickly also, because I know the title is Healing from Childhood Trauma. Trauma is a word that's like narcissist. Trauma is a word that's getting thrown around a lot these days.
Yeah.
And I'm glad people are talking about it. Really, I am. But I think some people are misusing the word, right? So like I was in, going back to Starbucks again, maybe I drink too much coffee, but
Well, you have to pick my share because I'm allergic to it. So you get mine.
so I'm drinking for both of us.
There you go. Yeah.
I mean, I was in Starbucks and someone picked up her drink. She was young, like a teenager, early 20. And she took a sip and it was too hot. And she went, "Oh my God, I'm traumatized. That was too hot." And I was like, so, or, like first year university students, they do poorly on a test and they're like, "I'm traumatized. I can't finish university."
It's kind of like the experience that often happens with pre-med students and medical school students. They basically take on the symptoms of whatever the latest disease is that they're studying.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And the reason that I bring this into conversation is because language matters. So trauma, I like to talk about traumatic events. So there's certain events, and traumatic events are things that happen outside of the normal human experience. So, doing poorly on a test, having an argument with someone, sipping a coffee that's too hot, these are not considered traumatic events to have the impact that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Right. So I see that word being sort of watered down in today's world. Trauma is how your body responds to that external traumatic event. Right. So there's a difference in terms of just the wording that we use there. And generally speaking, people will experience 2, maybe 3 truly traumatic events in their life. And these are big things. We're usually centered around health or close to losing your own life, or any sort of accident, or any sort of like, if you were exposed to war, extreme violence. This is what we constitute as, extreme traumatic events.
Yeah.
And the early work on trauma and PTSD and then CPTSD was done on Army veterans.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they came back from war. So that's where we generally have our understanding. So I'm happy that people are talking about trauma, but I want to make sure that we're not talking about like, "Oh, McDonald's screwed up my order. I'm so traumatized." That's not, that's not what it is, right?
That's just life.
Yeah. The key differentiator that I heard in what you said is, how did it affect your body? How did it affect you internally? It isn't so much how severe the trauma is. It's what was the effect on you?
Yes. And again, how old were you when it happened? How much did you understand it?
Mm-hmm.
How much did you internalize it? There's now some beautiful trauma-based therapies that are really helpful. I myself have done EMDR. It's eye movement rapid desensitization, which allows for the body to release what they're still holding on to in regards to traumatic events that we've experienced. And that's really helpful. So I'm a big believer that, different modalities can work really well together. Childhood trauma, we have to recognize that there were many children who did not receive the connection and love that I would say a healthier child, because it does impact, right? So a healthier child would have experienced, and they are at a disadvantage when they go through the world.
Mm-hmm.
and they do have more intense triggers. They tend to feel emotions like in a heightened state, but we can work on this stuff, right?
Mhm.
So it can be unlearned, it can be reworked, and I really do want folks to know that understanding your attachment style is just the step of, the first step of awareness, but your attachment style is actually the biggest predictor for the quality of the relationships that you will have in your life. So if you're truly looking to lean into love and connection and move out of survival mode and get the most out of life, which is all about connections, all about people, then it's really worth it to invest to understand where your patterns are coming from and look to adopt new patterns.
As usually happens when we do these programs, we get into the meat of it, and it's starting to flow, and like there's all these different directions to go, and then I look up and, oh my God, the time is up. And that has been what has happened today as well. So the pattern continues. Thank you very much. My compassion mind thanks you for the re-imprinting of the same message over and over again.
That means we had a good time.
It's exactly what that means.
Oh, definitely.
We had our daily dose of happy, and that's the most important thing. But there are a couple things that we need to do before we're completing the show today. First and foremost, for someone who wants to reach out and perhaps explore the idea of, diving into this kind of thing with you or your team, how do they find you? And we got to tell them how to find you.
Thank you both. So my website is securelyloved.com. You can take the quiz online, which is free. You could also book an intro 20-minute free consult with myself or any of the other relationship and attachment trauma practitioners working within the group. They are fantastic. We offer individual counseling. We offer couples counseling and also group workshops. Many people prefer to work within a group environment. And so we have weekly group workshops as well to be able to really move someone quickly towards secure attachment. I'm all over the internet. We have a YouTube channel, Securely Loved. We're on Instagram at securely_loved. We're on TikTok. My sons showed me how to go on TikTok.
You joined the 21st century generation.
I mean, so now I'm on TikTok, again, securely_loved. So there's multiple ways to find us. And I would encourage everyone there's some good information on the website, and to, just take the first step, like take the little quiz. It'll take 10 minutes of your time, and, ask yourself, does this surprise me? Am I surprised by this? Right. And sort of start there.
Yeah, it's a good place to start.
Yeah.
Thank you for giving people that. And we'll also make sure we'll include a link in the show notes to make it easier to find your website too. So that's usually our route to making it. Okay, this is the map. This is where you can find your way to everything else. So we'll make sure that they have that. Second thing that I like to do, this has become a pattern for the last couple of years. I noticed something a few years ago. I noticed that we don't tend to give credit to all the people like yourself who come onto this program and other programs and put out social media posts and blog posts and do all this other kind of stuff, getting all this information out there because they're so passionate about what they're doing. But we don't give them credit for all that great content they're putting out there. And you end up helping people you didn't even know that you helped. You didn't even know that they were listening. You didn't know who they were. You didn't know their story. You didn't know how, but they were able to take something away from it. And it occurred to me, that's something we need to recognize more. So I figure as a podcast host, that's something I can do. So Bev, on behalf of those people you've never met, never seen, never will meet, never will see, who you've been helping in all these different ways that you don't even know about, on their behalf, thank you for what you're doing. Because you're making a big difference in this world.
Yeah, I feel like I'm going to cry.
Very common response, by the
way. We do this work because we know it's impactful. And you're right. I don't. There are thousands of people that have consumed my content. I have no idea who they are. Right. But if they were to take a snippet away and they had one aha moment or something gave them comfort, like, it's a blessing, right? I couldn't ask for anything more. So thank you for recognizing it. And that's why I put out so much content. Because I think, you never know when you're going to release a little snippet that someone's going to go, okay, now that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, actually, what we've learned is every snippet you put out is going to be that snippet for somebody.
We
have a tendency to think, well, maybe it's just one or two. It's actually all of them.
Yeah, I love that. I really do. Thank you for saying that. Yeah, I spend a tremendous amount of time trying to get, content out on social media because I do think you're right. I don't know who it's helping, but I really want to believe that it's helping people.
Well, it does. It does. You just consider yourself to have been reinforced. Yeah, it really does work. It really does have an impact. So that's a good thing. Which brings us to the final thing that we always like to do every show. Because as you can tell, I have wonderful co-hosts, Anne-Marie is one of them, who have these tremendously fabulous perspectives that they bring into the show. And that perspective enables them to tie the whole thing together in a way that me as the host, I would not necessarily be able to do. So you were asking, how is it that somebody could actually be perceiving what you're saying? You're about to find out. So Anne-Marie, you've been thinking about this, I know, because you know what's coming, right?
Yeah.
How are you tying it together today? What's your takeaway?
I think, first of all, I just want to say you're definitely hitting people, because I've been looking like the 4 people and I'm thinking, oh, I'm this person, but then I can see in certain situations I go to this person. So that awareness was really helpful. But also for me, you really helped me understand how my behavior can affect my children. And, things you don't realize that you're doing that are actually quite huge to a kid. So certainly for me, you definitely jotted my brain. So thank you very much. But the thing that I just noticed, and you did touch on it, and I think for me, what I think is going to help me going forward, and that you covered very well, is we get frustrated with other people when they don't communicate in the same way as us. And actually understanding the reasons behind it and understanding these 4 different communication and relationship models, that's huge. And I think that you can be more empathic if you understand people and think of this in the background. So I wanted to thank you for that, because that was a real light bulb moment.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I actually have a course. It's up on Udemy. It's specifically about communication within the different attachment styles. Because the things that are so apparent, and we'll talk about a romantic relationship, are communication and coping mechanisms or behaviors. Those are the 2 things that can either really keep a pairing together or pull them apart. So it's so important to understand not just how to communicate, but how the other person wants to communicate, right? Because how we want to communicate is not how we want it to be received all the time. So you make such a beautiful point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow. Okay. So this is a really great hour. Bev, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for sharing your expertise. And yeah, I know you were kind of concerned going into the show whether or not you're going to be able to stay with the vibe. I don't think you had any trouble with that.
Yeah. I mean, you guys did a great job in guiding me. So thank you.
Well, we're glad to have you. Thank you, Anne-Marie. Look forward to seeing you next week. And thank you to our podcast listeners everywhere. We will see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.